Hey guys, tonight we wander barefoot through the sands of ancient Nubia, where the heat hums like a furnace. The air smells of clay and smoke, and something peculiar catches your eye. The houses, they shimmer. Not gold, not white, but blue. Soft, dusty, oceanic blue. It's almost otherworldly, like someone dragged the sky down and plastered it onto walls. Your steps crunch quietly on the sun-baked earth, and the closer you get, the more surreal the scene becomes. The sun's dipped, low, casting its last yellow streaks across a village painted not in shadows, but in cool, calming hues. The walls pulse gently with residual warmth, but the blue seems to push back against the heat, like a quiet, magical rebellion. It's beautiful, strange, and just a little eerie. The question practically paints itself across your thoughts. Why would anyone paint mud brick houses this color? Who had the time, the pigment, the idea? And did they know that thousands of years later, you'd be standing here, blinking sleepily, watching the blue reflect the moonlight like a slow breath? Spoiler, you probably wouldn't survive a single day out here, not with the sun, the snakes, or the sandstorms waiting to exfoliate your soul. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward, fingertips trailing along a painted wall. The texture is dry but powdery, like chalk that's lost its will to stick. Up close, the blue isn't just one blue, it's streaked with subtle swirls of gray and turquoise, like someone mixed cloud water into the paint. In the distance, a goat bleats. A child giggles. Somewhere someone's cooking something that smells vaguely of onions and baked millet. Life is still happening, but you're not rushing. Not tonight. You're sleepwalking through history now. The village layout feels like a lazy spiral. No sharp corners, no gridded perfection. Just meandering paths that respect the wind. These houses aren't grand palaces. Either they're squat, square, and worn. But the walls are carefully coated, sometimes even twice, with this curious blue wash. There's pride in the pigment. A decision. A story. Historians believe many ancient Nubians used mineral-rich mud from the Nile, often mixed with ash or chalk, to coat their homes. But blue, that required something else, something rarer. Some say crushed azurite. Others whisper about a clever mixture of copper dust, goat's milk, and fermented ash. You pause beside a doorway and peer in. The interior is dim, but not dark. The blue on the outer walls has a softening effect, like wearing tinted glasses on a scorching day. And you can imagine it. Coming home after working the riverbanks or the date groves, brushing your sandals clean, leaning against a wall that didn't scorch your skin. One theory, just one among dozens, is that blue helped cool the surface of homes. Not literally like ice, of course, but perceptually, visually, emotionally, a psychological refreshment in a climate that could turn deadly before noon. Others argue the blue was spiritual, protective. In the same way some people hang garlic or Evil eye beads, these walls might have been painted as a barrier not against dust, but against demons, and just between us. There's a third idea that makes the rounds in academic circles, though it sounds suspiciously like something a sleepy historian made up after too much date wine. The theory? That Nubians painted their homes blue to reflect the Nile itself, too. Always have a piece of the river with them, even if they lived farther inland. Historians still argue whether these early homes were repainted seasonally, or only for festivals. Some sites show layers of blue wash, under white, then red, then back to blue again. Like homeowners couldn't make up their minds. Or maybe each color served a different purpose. Cooling, protection, status. Or maybe they just got bored. Still, tracing the wall with your fingers, you finally round a corner and spot something different. A broken down house, its roof caved in, and only one of its walls still clinging to blue. But even in ruin, that pigment hasn't left. It's faded, yes, but not gone. There's resilience in the color, or maybe the story, or maybe both. You sit down on a warm stone and close your eyes for a moment. In your mind's eye, you can see it. The morning rush of families repainting before market day, kids dipping their fingers into leftover wash to doodle on each other's arms. You picture a quiet artist with no name, no fame, just a few stolen hours at sunset, brush in hand, coating mud in blue like it matters, and maybe it did. A sleepy breeze kicks up a little dust, and it swirls lazily down the lane. A dog barks. Once, the sky deepens into a deeper blue overhead, trying to outmatch the houses. Good luck, sky. Somewhere far off, a drum taps once, then again. You can't tell if it's for a celebration or just to keep time. Either way, it fits. The paint chips beneath your hand. The pigment, even thousands of years later, still stains your fingertips faintly. A souvenir of something you'll never fully understand, but can almost feel. The breeze nudges your eyelids. The blue wall leans behind your back. And just like that, you start to melt into the night. You wake from your half-doze, still leaning against the crumbling blue wall, and rise slowly, your joints crackling like dry reeds. The village is quieter now. A hush blankets the alleys, save for the occasional thud of a jar being set down or the creak of a woven door flap. You stretch your back and wander farther in, toward the heart of the village where the walls seem fresher, brighter, almost like the paint has just dried. One home in particular draws your eye. The blue here is luminous, rich with layers. You run your palm over it. The texture is smoother, less grainy. Someone clearly mixed this batch with care. The Nubians, you learn, were no amateurs when it came to construction. Far from it. These homes were built with sun-dried mud bricks, stacked, packed, and plastered with skill, passed down for generations. And the paint, that came last. It was the final touch. Not merely decorative, but intentional dot. The base of it all started with Nile silt, a fine, fertile clay scooped from the riverbanks when the water receded. Mixed with chopped straw, it became plaster. But the color was trickier. You find yourself walking toward an older man, sitting cross-legged beside three large pots. He's stirring something thick and muddy in the first, tapping a stick against the rim with a sleepy rhythm. In the second pot, the mixture has a greenish hue. The third glows faintly like storm clouds before lightning. He beckons you closer. This, he motions, is crushed malachite, mined far to the south. When ground and mixed with oil or water, it creates a bright green-blue paint that clings to plaster like a second skin. Expensive, elusive, but beautiful dot in other homes. The pigment came from a more practical source. Ground ash, chalk, and powdered limestone. When combined with fermented water and goat milk, it created a soft, grayish-blue cheap, quick-drying, and easier to produce in batches. That's what most people used, unless they were rich, or holy, or trying to impress in-laws. You glance down at the man's hands. His nails are stained a deep green-blue, a color that never quite fades, even when you sleep, even when you die. He points toward the horizon and mutters something about the cave of dust. You gather he's referring to a local source of pigment, perhaps, a dried river bed where blue-tinted minerals clung to the rocks like whispers. Some scholars believe that Nubians harvested such dust deliberately, mixing it into the walls not just for aesthetic reasons, but symbolic ones. To paint your house blue, in a way, was to align it with the gods. And there's something else. The man taps his chest, then the wall, and then gestures toward the sky dot as above, so below. An old idea, but it makes sense. Blue wasn't just a color, it was cosmic, celestial. By painting their homes with sky tones, Nubians may have hoped to bring divine protection down to earth, or at least distract the sun for a few blessed hours. Historians still debate whether certain paints were reserved for specific seasons. Some dig sites reveal that blue plaster appears more frequently in rooms facing west, where the sun sets, and almost never on northern walls. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe early homeowners knew how to trick light with pigment long before we invented smart windows. That one tiny shard of painted plaster found along the Nile contains fragments of indigo pigment not native to the region. This has baffled archaeologists for years. Trade route fluke? Smuggled treasure? Or did someone journey hundreds of miles just to make their front door slightly more fabulous? And here's your quirky tidbit. In some remote villages, the blue paint wasn't applied with brushes, it was spit on. Literally, artisans would chew a mix of pigment and oil, then spit it in sprays onto the walls, like some divine llama creating. Interior design. Weird, yes. Effective. Apparently back in the present. You wander toward a half-open door and peek inside another home. The ceiling is dark, likely smoke-stained from years of cooking fires, but the walls, oh, the walls are smooth and cerulean. No art, no writing, just color, like living inside a whisper. Your fingers drift over the surface again. Even now, the walls retain a slight coolness. It's hard to believe this place was built with nothing more than mud, patience, and the occasional crushed rock from a faraway mine. You pause to imagine the scene. 3 women hunched over grinding stones, pounding ash and crushed copper ore into powder. children fetching water from the river, a grandfather muttering over the consistency of the wash, adding drops of fermented fig juice to activate the spirit, whatever that means. The recipe, like so many things, probably changed depending on who was asking. Your feet carry you forward into an alley where the blue deepens again. A deeper shade, almost indigo now. Maybe they layered it. Maybe the sun baked it richer. It clings to the edges of your vision like a shadow you want to chase. You step closer to another home and see handprints frozen in the pigment, small, deliberate, ones pressed in a pattern along the edge of the door frame. Not graffiti, a message, a ward, a blessing maybe. And still the question echoes, why blue? Why not white or red or yellow? All easier to make, all more common, but there's no answer here. Only more blue. The sun has dipped entirely now. The light turns silver, and the blue walls, they don't darken. They glow. You turn another corner, and the breeze greets you like a sigh through a linen curtain warm, then suddenly cool and laced with the faint scent of clay dust and roasted grain. The air here plays tricks. One moment it clings like a damp sheet. The next it flutters past, teasing your skin like a memory dot, and that heat? Oh, it's not gone. Not by a long shot. Even at night, the desert doesn't fully let go of the day's fury. It lingers in the stones, seeps from the rooftops, and coils around the walls like a lazy python. But here's the strange part every time you stand beside a blue-painted house, you feel better, calmer, maybe even cooler. Could it really be working? You lean your back to another wall, half expecting it to burn you, but it doesn't. It's warm, yes, but not blistering. Not like the unpainted wall you touched earlier. Remember that one? The beige oven disguised as a home? This one is gentler. The blue, it seems, pushes back. Historians don't all agree on the reason why. Some say it's just perception, that the color blue tricks your brain into feeling cool. Others insist it's about light absorption, that certain mineral pigments reflect more of the sun's punishing rays than others. Then there are the romantics, who claim the color mimics water, and the brain responds like it would to the shade near a river. You hear a faint chuckle nearby. A woman sits on a low stool, slicing something long and stringy into a basket. Her head wrap is almost the same shade as the wall behind her. When you ask clumsily about the blue, she shrugs. The sun hates you, she says matter-of-factly. But blue confuses it. You both laugh, kind of. It's one of those laughs where you're not sure if you're in on the joke or being gently roasted. Turns out, this was no fluke. Nubians understood the sun. They respected it, feared it, and designed their entire lives around avoiding its wrath. Homes were angled to catch the least direct heat. Courtyards were narrow to provide shade, and ceilings were thick with mud brick and palm beams to trap cool air inside. But that paint? That pale, smoky blue that haunts every wall? That was their final defense. Not physical, but psychological. And perhaps even spiritual. See, in this place, heat isn't just a weather condition. It's an enemy. A clever one. It seeps through clothes, stings through headscarves, dries your tongue to sandpaper in under an hour, And back then, there was no electricity, no fans, no ice water waiting in a fridge, just pigment and prayer. You shuffle forward again and pause. At a junction where three alleys meet like spokes on a wheel. The light here is different, less blue, more shadow. And suddenly it hits you. Some houses aren't painted at all, and the difference is immediate. The bare-walled homes radiate heat like ancient toasters, while the blue ones seem to hum at a gentler frequency dot. It's not magic, but it feels like it. And here's your quirky detail for the night. Some Nubians believe that houses with blue walls confused insects, especially biting flies. They claimed bugs couldn't see the color properly and would avoid it, a theory that oddly lines up with some modern science. Studies in Africa have shown that certain shades of blue and white attract fewer tsetse flies. Did ancient Nubians know this or just get lucky? Either way, thanks blue walls. You pass another building, its plaster flaking off in thick curls. The blue beneath is older, more muted, almost gray. It makes you wonder, how many times was this wall repainted? How many summers has it endured? There's something oddly human about it, like wrinkles on an elder's hands. Then, because of course your sandals catch on something in the dust, you nearly trip. Looking down, you see it's a flat stone, etched with lines, a measuring tile, maybe, or a tool for checking sun angles. You can almost imagine some early scientists squinting at it, trying to figure out how to shade the western wall just right so the interior stayed survivable. Historians still argue whether these early design decisions were intentional or just the result of trial and error. Some say Nubians studied heat patterns, tracking shade and airflow like proto-architects. Others insist it was all instinct and imitation, copying what seemed to work. Whatever the truth, they survived. In this brutal heat, with only mud, straw, and pigment, they survived. And here you are, millennia later, leaning against their secrets. The night deepens. The stars begin to peek out overhead, and still the village hums quietly around you. Number. Electricity. No lights, but you can see. Somehow the blue catches moonlight differently than bare clay. It reflects just enough to guide your steps without screaming for attention. And it comforts you, as if these walls aren't just shelter, but sentinels, watching, waiting, whispering you'll be okay. A goat trots past you, clearly on a mission. You step aside politely. The goat ignores you, as goats do. You get the feeling it's heading somewhere important, probably to debate color theory with a camel. You find a low stone bench and sit again. Behind you, another wall, another shade of blue. This one is nearly lavender in the moonlight. You lean into it, close your eyes, and you wonder, was it the pigment, the plaster, or the people who made it all feel like this? No matter, you're not leaving yet. You're not sure how long you've been resting there, eyes closed, back against the blue. Maybe a few minutes, maybe centuries. Time melts differently in places like this, places painted with pigment and stories, but soon a sound wakes you, a soft hissing, almost like sand being poured slowly from one jar to another. You blink and follow the sound, weaving between quiet homes, past woven doors, and shadowed corners, until you reach a small courtyard lit by firelight. A woman stands there, wearing a necklace of polished beads and shells, her hands busy grinding something in a shallow stone bowl. The hiss you heard? That's the dust. She's grinding dried bark and what looks like powdered charcoal. Beside her sits a boy with a clay pot, stirring slowly, rhythmically, as if he's afraid of waking the spirits. You step into the edge of the light and wait. She doesn't look up, but she speaks. "Snake season," she says. You blink. "You weren't expecting that dot," she explains, between soft scrapes and grinding, "that blue isn't just for heat. It's for protection, not from bandits. Not from wild animals, dot from spirits, dot in ancient Nubia. Color wasn't just aesthetic, it was spiritual armor. Each hue carried meaning. Red brought energy and aggression. White summoned peace and cleansing. But blue? Blue was a shield dot. It represented the sacred, the celestial, the eternal river, the goddess's breath. And perhaps most importantly, it repelled evil. Spirits, you see, don't like blue, or so the elders believed, especially the hot ones, the angry ones, the ones that lived in cracks, snakes, shadows, and dreams. If a child had nightmares, it wasn't just poor sleep, it was a visitation. And the cure? Paint the wall beside their bed blue. Paint it with intention, with ritual, maybe with a whispered name or two. You glance down at the grinding bowl again. It's not just ash and pigment. There are herbs too, crushed leaves, maybe fennel or myrrh. You can smell something bitter, earthy, almost metallic dot, and here's your quirky historical tidbit. In some Nubian villages, pregnant women would paint their door frames blue to keep away the eye. Not the evil eye, exactly, more like a general. Bad luck radar that could be set off by jealousy, arguments, or a poorly timed sneeze. And if someone sneezed while standing in your doorway, that was it. Blue paint immediately. Double coat. No questions. The woman gestures to a nearby wall and smiles. Snake tried to come inside last week, saw the paint, turned around. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. I don't argue with snakes. Fair enough. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were symbolic or literal. Were snakes actually repelled by color? Or did the paint signal to the community that this house was blessed, protected, or simply not worth the spiritual trouble? Maybe it's all true. Maybe none of it matters. What's undeniable is that the belief was real, and that belief shaped homes, families, entire villages. As you explore farther, you begin to notice little blue handprints near the base of many walls. Some are high, some low, some neat, some smudged. These weren't decorations, they were protective marks, like graffiti charms. A ward made not of stone or steel, but color. And some weren't just handprints. You round a corner and see an entire wall painted with swirling patterns, almost hypnotic. Spirals, dots, snake-like curves, all done in layered shades of blue. At the center, a faded sun with a slit pupil eye, staring down anyone who dares cross its gaze. You step back without realizing it. Then you notice something else. Tucked into the cracks of this painted wall are tiny objects. Twigs, beads, small bones, blue threads, like offerings, or traps, a physical and spiritual net. A woman walks past and sees you staring. She points to the wall and mutters, "For the whispers." And don't ask her to explain. Farther down the path, you pass a child carefully, dabbing at a corner of a house with a round, flat rock dipped in blue. No brush, just quiet focus. His tongue sticks slightly from the corner of his mouth as he paints. You stop to watch. His father comes up behind you, carrying a basket of dried herbs. He nods toward the boy. "That one sees shadows," he says. Blue keeps the shadows polite. You look again. The color the boy is using is different from the ones before. Lighter, brighter, almost sky blue. You ask what it's made of. The man scratches his beard and says ash, yes, milk, yes. But also, he searches for the word. Crushed shell. Tiny white shell. From river. Mixed with copper dust. Like the gods did. You wonder how many of these recipes were passed down by trial and error, and how many were whispered from grandmothers to daughters like sacred spells. Every mix of pigment was a different story. Some were more effective, some were just more beautiful, and maybe beauty was its own form of protection. You sit near the base of a wall, looking out at the painted village glowing under the sleepy starlight. Some walls gleam like river stones. Others look like storm clouds, frozen mid-rumble. And still others seem to shimmer, even without light. Maybe the spirits see it differently. Maybe that's the point. One last thought drifts across your mind before sleep tries to pull you under again. When they painted these walls, they weren't just defending their homes. They were painting stories. They were painting intentions. And you wonder, which shade of blue would you choose? You blink yourself awake again, this time with your cheek pressed against a cool patch of wall. It's a deeper blue here, bordering on midnight, and it smells faintly of earth, smoke, and old flowers, something someone must have tucked into the cracks long ago. You push yourself up slowly. The silence now is almost absolute, like the village has gone to sleep with you and left only the stars on duty. But you're not done wandering. Not yet. Not while there are still shades of blue you haven't seen. You move down a new alley, narrower than the last, where the homes are older, more weathered, but somehow prouder. The paint on these walls is patchier, almost flaking in places, but the color underneath is richer, not just darker, but deeper. More deliberate dot. It makes you pause and squint and compare, and that's when it hits you. Some walls are bluer than others, not just in shade or tone, but in intensity. Like one family had more access, more time, or maybe more faith in whatever recipe they were using. You run your fingers over one wall, smooth, even, lovingly maintained. Then over another, chipped, rough, the blue thinned to the color of a stormy sky. One feels like a whisper, the other like an echo. Suddenly you're struck by a very human thought. Were people in ancient Nubia judging each other's walls? You know they were. Of course they were. Did you see Aminet's new coat of blue wash? Practically glows. And she says it's crushed azurite. Azurite? Who even gets azurite these days? Just imagine the gossip dot in many ancient cultures. Status. showed up in the strangest places: door carvings, courtyard layouts, number of goats. And here, maybe it showed up in the blueness of your walls. Historians believe that some pigments, especially the rare ones, were costly to produce. If you were wealthy, you could afford richer materials: azurite, lapis, or imported indigo. Your walls would sing with color. If not, you made do with ash, chalk, and whatever your cousin's friend could sneak from the riverbed without getting caught. Some homes here have accent stripes along the roof edge, swirls around the doorway, even geometric shapes painted near the base. Decorative, yes, but also competitive. You find one wall striped with alternating layers: pale blue, deep turquoise, then a barely there lavender. Someone spent hours on this, maybe days. A painter with too much time, or a host expecting guests. Either way, the message is clear. We are not basic dot, and then just around the bend you see its opposite. A home so warm, so modest, it's almost invisible. The paint has faded to dust, the plaster is cracked, and there's only one clear patch of blue left, just above the threshold. A handprint, small, neat, preserved like a fossil. One single declaration: we tried. Quirky tidbit of the night? Some villages had what you might call an official blue. It wasn't written down, of course, but there was a general agreement and expectation that your house should match. If you painted it too green, people would talk. Too pale, they'd wonder if you were poor. Too bright, they'd suspect you were compensating for something. You wander past one such house where the color doesn't match. It's more teal than blue, and a little sparkly. Someone's taken liberties with crushed glass. The result? Dazzling, yes, but totally wrong. A neighbor stands nearby, pretending not to notice. But you see the side eyes. Oh yes, they're judging. Historians still argue whether color regulation in Nubian communities was enforced by law, tradition, or just good old-fashioned peer pressure. There's no written code that says, "Thou shalt not use seafoam." But that doesn't mean there weren't consequences. You keep walking and pass another home with fresh paint still wet and spots, the brush strokes visible. The blue here is sharp, vibrant, electric. It nearly hums. On the wall is painted a simple symbol: 3 curved lines, like waves. You ask the man standing nearby what it means. He says, "My daughter survived a fever." We repaint when something good happens. That wall isn't about status. It's about gratitude. And just like that, the gossip fades. You remember that behind each pigment choice is a person, a family, a story. Some paint for beauty, some paint for protection. Others paint to celebrate another day alive. You move deeper into the village's winding paths, where homes are built tighter together and the blue seems more uniform. It feels calmer here, less competitive, like a collective exhale. And in this part of the village, something strange happens. The walls begin to glow. Not literally, of course, but in the moonlight, the pigment takes on a soft, luminous sheen. Maybe it's the minerals. Maybe it's your eyes adjusting. Or maybe this really is a place where even the air has learned to shimmer. You pass a group of elders sitting quietly by a low fire. They're not talking, just sipping something from clay. Cups, wrapped in shawls, watching the stars peek through the patchy clouds. Their walls are blue, but understated, confident, like they've seen many layers come and go. You sit a little ways off, lean against one such wall, and finally let your body rest. The warmth of the day has finally bled away. The breeze carries, a chill now, gentle and welcome. Your breath slows down above you. A tiny gecko scurries across the plaster, pausing for a moment beneath a painted symbol. You don't know what it means, but it feels like it's watching over both of you. And the blue? Still there, still whispering, still saying, you're safe, you're seen, you're home. You stretch your legs, slowly rising from your spot under the watchful blue wall, joints creaking like ancient doors. Somewhere nearby, someone's grinding herbs again. The scent of sage and something smoky drifts past you, half perfume, half warning. You follow it without thinking, drawn by instinct more than curiosity. The alleys narrow, twist again, then open into a hidden courtyard. There, beneath a canopy of date fronds, you find something both familiar and unexpected. A workshop. Not a grand space, just a few pots, flat stones, and an assortment of dusty sacks piled like sleepy animals. But the smell? It hits you instantly. Sharp, earthy, metallic, faintly sweet. A man in a pale linen robe is bent over a wide stone slab, mixing something that looks like blue cake batter with a paddle made from horn. He doesn't look up when you approach, just keeps stirring in slow, practiced circles. His hands are stained every shade between aquamarine and ash. You've found the pigment master. He doesn't need to say anything. You sit down on a nearby crate, and he slides a flat dish toward you. It's filled with a soft, sticky blue paste. Not quite paint. Not yet. It needs drying, scraping, mixing, and then more mixing. He nods to your fingers. Go on. You dip one in and the texture surprises you. It's gritty but smooth. Wet but not watery. And warm. It smells like stone, fire, and something fermented. He finally speaks. Camel dung. From young ones. Hotter inside. You blink. He gestures to a small jar beside the bowl. We burn it. Mix the ash with copper, crushed shell, and lime dust. Makes the walls breathe. And just like that, you've entered the ancient chemistry of Nubian blue. It wasn't just about color. It was alchemy. Every ingredient mattered. Every ratio. Every step. Some formulas included ash from burnt fig bark mixed with animal fat or goat milk. Others used dried flower petals and powdered egg shell. And yes, camel dung played a role. Its high heat and mineral content made it ideal for burning down into ash. Each household had their own take, their own secret recipe, passed down through generations like an heirloom. You didn't just buy blue, you made it. And making it meant knowing your climate, your materials, and your patience limit. Some pigments took days to prepare. First, the raw materials had to be burned slowly, carefully, with prayers, or at least curses, depending on who was in charge. Then the resulting ash had to cool before being ground with stones, sometimes round ones for a finer grain, flat ones for a thicker texture. Water wasn't enough. You needed a binder: goat milk, date sap, egg whites, spoiled beer, even. Some say spit. Yes, again with the spit. Ancient artisans really loved to add personal flavor to their work. You lean closer as the pigment master picks up a curved bone tool and begins pressing the paste onto a chunk of sun-dried brick. He does it carefully, like buttering sacred bread. No brush, just bone and breath. He explains that blue wasn't just slapped on, it was layered. The first coat sealed the wall. The second added tone. The third was for the gods. Glance around the courtyard and notice tiny swirls of dried pigment on everything. The edges of pots, the man's ankles, the base of the fig tree in the corner. Even the cat napping nearby has blue dust in its fur. Quirky detail. There's an old Nubian tale that says if a cat rolls in blue paint and sleeps in your doorway, you'll have good luck for 7 moons, unless it sneezes. Then the spell reverses. Naturally, Dot, you ask the man why he paints. He shrugs. My father did. His father, too. The wall remembers. It's a lovely answer. And then, with a small, knowing smile, he pulls out a folded bit of cloth, unwraps it. Inside is a lump of something darker, almost black. He places it into your hand, Dot. It's warm, heavy, grainy. Lapis, he says. The sacred stuff, Dot, true. Lapis lazuli deep, ultramarine blue, flecked with pyrite like stars. Wasn't native to Nubia. It came from Afghanistan, traded over vast distances by camel and boat and sheer stubbornness. To have a bit of it, that was rare, royal, revered. Historians still debate how much lapis made its way into Nubian walls. Most agree it was reserved for temples or the homes of priests. Others argue it was mixed in tiny amounts with more common pigment to bless. A batch of paint, but here it is, sitting in your hand. Heavy with meaning. Expensive even now. You hand it back carefully, and the man rewraps it with something like reverence. Then he goes back to stirring. You sit quietly for a while, watching the slow alchemy unfold. The careful scoops, the deliberate pressure, the little clicks of bone on stone. You realize something. This wasn't just home maintenance. It was ritual, sacred and sweaty, equal parts chemistry and prayer. And it's still happening. Right now, on this quiet night under these blue stars. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the scent of dust and mineral cling to your breath. When you open them again, the pigment master is gone. Only the cat remains, licking its paw and flicking its tail in your direction. Dot, your hand still carries a smudge of the paste. You smear it across your palm, press it to the wall behind you. One more print in a lineage of 1,000. You leave the pigment master's courtyard quietly, still feeling the weight of that lapis dust between your fingers, even though it's long gone. The cat watches you disappear around the corner, probably judging your posture, or maybe blessing your journey. With cats, it's always both. Now the village is deeper in sleep. Doors are shut, lanterns snuffed. The air has cooled enough to feel like night, rather than leftover afternoon. And yet, as you pass more homes, a thought starts whispering in the back of your mind. This pigment, this sacred blue, wasn't always shared willingly. You follow a crooked alley, and soon you're at the edge of the village where the houses give way to open sand. There's a small structure here, half collapsed, long abandoned. But on its outer wall, faint even in the moonlight, is a splash of deep indigo, shaped like a fingerprint dragged sideways. It stands out too rich, too dark too. Forbiddance? You step inside. There's not much left, just broken pots, a few sun-bleached roof beams, and a cracked wall where someone once carved a circle inside another circle. A symbol for protection, maybe, or guilt. Here's the truth historians don't always write down. In many ancient communities, the rarer the pigment, the more fiercely it was guarded. And in Nubia, the richest blues were considered not only sacred, but at times illegal for commoners. It wasn't law in the way we think of today, with scrolls and signatures, but the taboo was strong. If you were caught using royal pigment on your private mud brick shack, it could be interpreted as blasphemy, arrogance, or even an attempt to deceive the gods. Quirky tidbit for tonight. There are tales from Upper Nubia where blue crimes were punished not with fines or prison, but with dyeing rituals. As in, they dyed your hands blue, permanently. Then everyone would know what you did and exactly where to seek you during festivals. Far away, you sit on a fallen beam, watching the painted streak on the wall fade into the shadows. It's easy to imagine how it happened. Someone got access to the good stuff, a cousin who traveled. A trader owed a favor. They mixed a small batch, painted it secretly, probably at night, and someone found out. Maybe it was the neighbors. Maybe it was the way the wall glowed too brightly when the sun hit it. Or maybe someone simply got jealous. You can practically hear the whispered accusations. Why does he get ultramarine? That's the thing about color. It doesn't whisper. It announces. Historians still argue whether these pigment taboos came from politics or religion. Was it about maintaining royal status or spiritual hierarchy? Some say it was both. Others suggest pigment purity was tied to rain rituals, that only certain families could use certain shades during drought ceremonies, that if you used the wrong color, you might literally offend the sky. You imagine it, a village elder standing in front of a half-blue house, arms crossed, voice low. The gods don't like pretenders. And yet, the urge was there, always, to stretch the rules, to show off, to paint your front wall in a deeper hue, just once, just for a festival. Maybe nobody would notice, but they always did. You wander farther from the ruins and find yourself near a dried-up well, its stones stacked, high and round. The inside is dark, but at the very bottom, where moisture once pooled, you see a shimmer of blue. Not pigment, not paint, stolen dye. Someone poured it there, maybe to hide it, maybe to curse it, or maybe it was the only place cool enough to store it without drying out. It's impossible to tell now. The only witness is a faded handprint on the nearest stone, darkened with age, barely visible. You touch the stone and imagine the weight of pigment jars carried in sacks or wrapped in linen, smuggled through quiet alleys at night. Traders knew the value of blue, not just in coin, but in power, in story, in perception. A wealthy-looking house might command more respect. A bluer house might be assumed blessed, even if the color was stolen. You pass one more ruined home, now overtaken by creeping vines and desert shrubs, and spot a final symbol painted on its crumbling doorframe. 3 dots over a curved line. You don't know what it means. Maybe a family crest, maybe a warning, but the pigment still holds. Even after centuries, that's the thing about color. It endures, even when houses fall, even when people vanish, even when stories are forgotten. And still, the pigment clings to the earth like memory dots. You begin the slow walk back to the center of the village, past houses once again tidy and intact, glowing gently under starlight. Every shade of blue here feels like a whispered defiance against heat, against forgetfulness, against the rules of kings and spirits. You reach a wall and lean against it, catching your breath. It's smoother here, simpler, a humble blue with no stripes, no sparkle, no forbidden dyes, and somehow it's the most comforting of all. The night deepens, and the sky seems impossibly vast now, studded with stars like tiny grains of salt spilled across black velvet. The village has grown utterly still, no laughter, no drums, no footsteps. Just a soft creak of wooden beams, cooling in the distant rustle of dry palm fronds in the breeze. You're walking again, but slower now. You've started to notice more than just color patterns. The way the richer blues cluster closer to the river's edge. How the deeper pigments adorn larger doorways. Some walls seem deliberately coated in darker shades, like ceremonial robes stitched directly into the village. And then there it is, a wall so dark, so saturated it almost drinks in the light. You blink, you step closer. This is no ordinary house. The paint here is heavy, layered with a patience that can only come from wealth or ritual. The blue is bold, almost navy, and framed by decorative lines of gold and red pigment, now faded to rust and ochre. The structure is more ornate. The walls are higher. The courtyard gate is carved with spirals and pomegranate shapes. You've found a palace, or, at least, the closest thing to one in this corner of Nubia. A woman stands just inside the gate, older, wrapped in thick fabric, even in this warmth. She doesn't speak, but her presence alone makes you pause, as if you need permission just to breathe near these walls. You nod. She nods back. You step inside. The inner courtyard is stunning. Not vast, but purposeful. The blue walls here are lined with faint white dots, stars, perhaps painted in constellations. At the far end is a shrine or altar with bowls of dried herbs and faded cloth hanging like flags in the breeze. This was not just a home dot, it was a seat, a node of power. And the color tells you that before anything else dot in many ancient Nubian communities, pigment was more than tradition. It was symbolism layered in status. Deeper, purer blues were often reserved for spiritual leaders, ruling elders, or figures connected to the gods. It wasn't just a trend, it was a hierarchy. Historians believe the richest blue pigments, especially those imported or mined at a cost, were deliberately reserved for temples, tombs, and royal spaces. The idea was simple. If the gods wore blue, so should those closest to them. And if you were neither divine nor noble, stay away from the royal shade's dot inside the courtyard. You trail your fingers along the painted walls, and the chill surprises you. Even here, the blue seems to cool the surface. Not dramatically, but enough to notice. It's subtle, mysterious, like walking through shadow without losing the light. Quirky tidbit: there's a myth from Lower Nubia that says the darker the blue on a building, the stronger its pull on the rain. Some believe that dark blue walls could lure clouds closer, call them like spirits, to bless the fields. If your walls faded, time to repaint or time to pray. You glance upward. No clouds tonight, but the myth lingers in the back of your mind, like a half-remembered tune. You move farther in and find a small room at the back of the palace. The floor is smooth. The walls are painted in two tones, lighter near the ceiling, darker toward the base. A visual trick? A symbolic division between heaven and earth? Inside you find a shallow pool lined with smooth stones. Dry now, but once filled, perhaps for ritual baths, or moonlight reflections, or maybe just to keep cool. The palace feels like a blueprint of balance: color, light, water, silence, all working together in harmony. You realize this space was not just built to be seen, it was built to be felt. You sit by the dry pool for a moment, watching the wind flicker through a cracked doorway. A faint chime sings somewhere wind pottery, maybe the past itself. You lean back, your eyes catching again on the dark blue plaster dot. It's easy to forget this wasn't mass-produced. This pigment was mixed by hand, carried, stored, applied slowly, reapplied with care, layered with belief, and the occasional bribe to get the rare stuff. Historians still debate whether some of these homes used a rotating pigment system, where certain walls were repainted every solstice or after key ceremonies. It's possible. In some digs you find blue under white, then red, then blue again, like the walls themselves were keeping track of time, or devotion, or the shifting powers inside. And maybe they were. You get up and walk slowly through the rest of the structure. It isn't large, but it doesn't need to be. Power doesn't always roar, it often settles. It paints its walls dark and waits. You exit the palace and find yourself once again in the open air. You hadn't realized how much cooler it was inside, maybe. From the thickness of the walls, maybe the blue pigment, or maybe just reverence playing tricks on your senses. Outside, the sky yawns wider. The stars are beginning to slide toward the horizon, and the palace glows behind you like a fossilized wave. Still wet with history dots, you continue walking, deeper into the village toward simpler homes now. But the memory of that blue sticks with you. Not just the color, but what it meant. Who could use it? Who couldn't? And what might have happened if you stepped over that line? Some people see walls. Others see boundaries. But in this place, the color was the boundary, and it still is. The sky is turning the color of crushed figs deep purple, with the faintest gold smudge creeping at the edges. The village is still hushed, blanketed in the kind of stillness that only happens right before the first rooster dares to speak. You keep walking, steps slower now, your path curving toward the outskirts, where the blue paint begins to lose its battle with the wind. Out here, the walls are more faded. Some are barely tinted at all, just ghost-pale traces of what once might have been brilliant color. But occasionally, you catch glimpses of something unexpected, bright flecks and patterns, swirls or shapes that look suspiciously deliberate. Less like pigment, more like symbols. You stop at one such wall, partially collapsed, the paint peeling like dried petals. On it, unmistakable, even in the dim light, is the outline of a goat. Not painted in full, just the barest suggestion. 2 horns, a short nose, a comically small tail. It's been dabbed on in dark blue pigment. Beside it, 3 dots in a triangle. You blink. Okay, that's odd. A few steps later, another goat. This one more detailed, still blue, still rough, but clearly intentional. Next to it, a spiraled line, curling inward like a snail shell. You crouch down and try to make sense of it. And that's when you remember something. You'd heard this before, or read it, or dreamed it. There's a fringe theory among Nubian historians highly disputed, naturally, that certain villages used stylized goat symbols to signal sacred events or omens. According to the legend, if a goat was born with a bluish marking, a spot or streak that resembled paint, it was believed to be a sign, a message, sometimes good, sometimes not so much. One version says such goats were guides, chosen by spirits to walk ahead of important journeys. Another says they were warnings, omens of disease or failed harvests. The same animal, 2 entirely different meanings. That's history for you. Historians still argue whether these goat paintings were part of a broader belief system, or just regional graffiti. Some claim they're symbolic language like proto-writing, each one recording births, deaths, or the arrival of a particular celestial event. Others are less charitable, suggesting they're just children's drawings that somehow got mistaken for sacred messages. But even the skeptics can't explain the pigments. Because here's the strange part. The goats are painted in a different blue, not local, not from Nile mud or ash. Analysis of one wall scrap showed traces of ultramarine level mineral content, more in line with imported lapis lazuli, which means someone either traded far and wide to get this pigment, or someone was using their best blue to draw goats. That's commitment. You continue your stroll, now scanning every wall for more of them. And sure enough, there they are, goat after goat, dot after dot, sometimes overlapping, sometimes standing alone. You spot one house with 6 tiny goat shapes painted just beneath the window, all of them facing west. All of them identical. You knock quietly on the wooden beam by the doorway, more out of politeness than curiosity. The door creaks open just an inch, and an elderly man peers out, his eyes like wet glass in the moonlight. You gesture toward the goats on his wall. He grunts. "Bad year," he says. Then closes the door again, dot. You walk on. A few steps later, you see the opposite, another. home, walls gleaming faintly, goats painted in lighter shades, all prancing or mid-step. These ones are smaller, arranged in a curve around the doorway, like a garland, joyful, playful. Even, you wonder, was this some kind of calendar? Did people track time or events through blue animal sigils? Did they use the pigment not just to protect their homes, but to mark them? One wall even shows a scene crude but intentional of a goat standing between two huts, with small blue streaks descending from the sky. Rain. It's raining on the goat. Or maybe because of the goat. Quirky. Detail of the night? In at least one Nubian folk tale, a blue goat named Zany speaks directly to the river god, negotiating for cooler weather. The villagers promised never to paint animals again after Zany vanished mysteriously. Clearly, someone broke the deal. A breeze picks up, scattering dust across your sandals. You sit down on a nearby stone, lean your back against a tired wall, and stare up at a goat painted just above your head. It's lopsided, missing an ear. The brush strokes are rough, probably a child's work. Still, the blue holds, stronger than the mud, stronger than time. It's funny, isn't it? All this significance, all this mystery, layered into a single shape. Some lines, two horns, and pigment. That's what history is made of: dot lines, hunches, half facts, and stubborn memories. Goats drawn in forbidden ultramarine and handprints pressed. An ash and milk wash dot. You close your eyes, and you can almost hear them, the children laughing as they dab blue goats onto the walls. The elders grumbling about tradition. The arguments at the market about what blue means this year. And somewhere far away, a real goat bleats in the darkness, either confirming or completely denying every theory you've just considered. Hard to say, but one thing's certain. Even here, even in this curious corner of Nubia, stories stick best to walls, especially when they're blue. Dawn is beginning to peel the darkness off the sky in long, soft ribbons, pale orange at the edges, with that peculiar shade of lavender that always shows up before the sun commits. The village isn't awake yet, but it's stretching. Somewhere behind you, a rooster gives a lazy, half-hearted crow like he's not quite sold on the new day. You've wandered to the edge of the settlement, where the homes begin to thin out and the land stretches wider. The walls here aren't blue not yet. They're bare, waiting. But tucked behind a small rise of earth, you spot something out of place. A circle of stones, a row of bundled sacks, and beside it a wooden cart piled high with jars of pigment, some sealed, some open, all in varying shades of blue. You've stumbled onto a trading camp, temporary but important. You walk closer and immediately feel the shift in air. This place hums differently, quieter but watchful. No one rushes here. No one speaks unless they have to. A woman in a wide scarf raises an eyebrow as you approach, then gestures toward the nearest jar. "Don't sniff the dark one," she says. "It bites. You don't ask. You just nod and move on. This is where the blues came from, not just made, but moved. Because not all of Nubia's pigment was local. The rarest shades, the most vibrant ultramarines and turquoise brights, were traded across deserts, mountains, and rivers. And they had stories. You pause by a half-open jar of powder so bright it seems to glow in its own shadow. That one, the woman says. Afghan lapis, traded for linen, salt, and an iron blade. It would have traveled over 2,000 miles to get here, carried on the backs of camels, packed in leather pouches, bargained for in languages that have long since vanished into wind. Historians marvel at this trade network. It connected Nubia to Egypt, Persia, Mesopotamia, even as far as India. The route was never official, never charted with signs or flags. But it worked, and pigment was one of its most precious currencies. More valuable than grain, sometimes more than gold. Why? Because color wasn't just vanity, it was symbol, status, power. A wall painted in Afghan blue told a story no words could capture. Trail a hand along one of the sacks, surprised at its weight. The woman grins. Crushed azurite from the mountain caves, mixed with fig ash and camel bone. You try not to look too impressed, but she sees it anyway. Quirky tidbit for this stretch of the journey: one pigment, known locally as sky bone, was made from crushed ostrich eggshell, mixed with copper oxide and dried aloe resin. It produced a pale, chalky blue that faded beautifully. The color was beloved by poets and despised by merchants. It wore away too fast to be sold at a markup. And just beyond the pigment sacks, you see the heart of it all, a ledger scratched into bark. No paper, just lines carved deep with a stylus. It's a simple system. Names, quantities, maybe even blessings for safe travel. You glance down and notice a pile of small tokens beside the ledger, tiny blue tiles, each with a unique scratch mark. These were receipts, primitive but effective. Each tile represented a trade, a sack of salt for a jar of paste, a bolt of dyed linen for a pigment stone. Historians still argue whether these traders operated under royal authority or independently. Were they part of a sacred guild, or rogue color smugglers chasing profit and pigment dreams? Some evidence points to official routes guarded by temple agents. Other theories suggest rival villages had their own pigment runners, protected not by warriors but by curses. You step farther back and spot a group of empty carts being loaded. One man secures a box with extreme care, padding it with woven palm leaves. What's in it? You ask. Rain color, he replies. You blink. Rain? He nods. They believe it brings clouds. We don't argue with belief. Fair enough. The camp smells of clay, dust, and oil, earthy and heavy. You sit on a flat stone nearby, watching the morning unfold. Traders gather, stretch, sip bitter drinks from gourd cups. No one rushes. This isn't a bazaar. It's more like a temple that smells like crushed copper and goat leather. One man holds up a rock that looks disappointingly ordinary until he chips it with a pick. Inside, a brilliant stripe of azure. He whistles. The others nod slowly. A good find. You wonder how many lives were spent chasing blue. How many villages bartered livestock for a single jar of foreign pigment. How many artists saved shavings of rare stone just to color a baby's name on the wall. Pigment, it turns out, is more than paint. It's memory in powdered form. You walk. back into the village as the sun finally peeks over the hills. The blue-painted houses catch the light like silk pulled taut. You can already feel the heat pressing in again, but for now it's still quiet. The traders pack up. The dust settles, and somewhere in a sealed jar beneath woven cloth is the next shade of sacred blue, waiting to be stirred, smeared, whispered onto a wall. You pass a boy sitting by his door, holding a stone pestle, grinding something blue into powder with the same look of quiet determination you saw on the pigment master. The color doesn't come cheap, but it comes that it always comes. The morning sun now filters through the palm fronds and the gaps between rooftops like liquid gold, soft at first, but already gaining that familiar edge. Soon it will be too hot to walk barefoot, too bright to stare at the walls directly. But for now, the light is kind, and it brings with it something you didn't quite expect. Coolness. Not much. Not the dramatic blast of an air-conditioned room or the deep, damp chill of a cave. But as you step inside another home, one with blue walls darkened by time and touch, you notice it. The difference. The shade. The relief. The walls are painted. A soft, matte blue, nothing flashy or vibrant. Just layers of that familiar pigment, dusted with ash and time, curving gently around the room like folded linen. You sit cross-legged in a corner, back pressed to the wall. It's early, but the temperature inside is noticeably cooler than what waits outside. You wonder, is this just your imagination? A trick of contrast? Or was there more to it? Turns out you're not alone in wondering. Historians and climate scholars have been scratching their heads for years about the passive cooling properties of ancient Nubian homes, especially the painted ones. Could blue walls actually lower indoor temperature? Was there a science hidden behind the superstition? One theory holds that the mineral pigments themselves reflected sunlight more efficiently than untreated plaster, especially the paler shades, those mixed with chalk or lime. Others suggest that the paint created a kind of insulation, a buffer between the blazing heat and the mud brick beneath. Still others argue it wasn't about temperature at all, that the psychological effect of blue, its calming association with water and shade, helped people feel cooler, even if the thermometer disagreed. And yet, you can't deny what you're experiencing right now. The house is quiet. The light is dim, muted by the thick walls and the painted surface. The air feels still, heavy, but breathable. You run your palm over the plaster cooler than your skin. The color seems to pull the heat out of the room like a sponge. There's no fan, no wind, just pigment. You lie back, stretch out, and stare up at the ceiling, where even the underside of the roof beams has been painted in streaks of pale blue. Someone took the time to reach up there and coat every inch. Maybe they knew something we've forgotten, quirky detail of the day. In some Nubian households, people chewed certain herbs and spat the juice into pigment mixes, believing it would charm the paint into protecting the house from fire and heat. One of these herbs, desert sage, actually contains a mild cooling oil. Coincidence or early climate engineering? You walk through the rest of the house slowly, marveling at how the light bounces off the walls. Not brightly, more like diffused, soft, Even the shadows here seem slower. In the main room, a cluster of clay jars sits against one wall, likely water storage. The wall behind them is darker blue, stained and slightly damp, and still it feels cooler. Could it be that? Blue paint and water work together to regulate the home's microclimate. One jar slightly leaks, and you notice how the moist wall around it keeps its pigment longer than the drier corners. Perhaps that too is known. Perhaps nothing here was accidental. Historians still argue whether these cooling effects were intentional or just a happy accident. Did ancient Nubians test pigments for temperature? Or did they simply keep doing what worked without overthinking it? There are no blueprints, no records, just walls and stories. You exit the house and immediately feel the sun hit your face like an open oven. It's not unbearable yet, but the contrast is sharp. You glance back at the modest home. The color has already begun to lighten under the new light, its morning softness hardening into midday glare, but the inside still lingers on your skin. You pass another home where a woman is repainting a shaded inner wall. She crouches on a woven mat, dipping her fingers into a bowl of thin, pale wash. No brush, just fingertip swirls. Her child sits beside her, dragging a stick through the dust, murmuring to a beetle. You ask her, gesturing to the paint, "Does it make the room cooler?" She shrugs, cooler to sleep. Not a scientific answer, but it's the one that matters. You ask what's in the mix. She lists ingredients like a cook reciting a recipe: ash, chalk, crushed melon rind, a little salt. She pauses, then adds, "River, smell." You blink. She nods. It helps the dreams. There's something beautiful about that, how practical needs and spiritual ideas aren't separate here. They blend. Paint cools the room, but it also cools the spirit. The blue isn't just functional, it's meditative. You look around the village again and start to realize something. There's a rhythm here, a seasonal choreography. When the dry winds blow hot, families repaint. When babies are born, walls are refreshed. When elders die, pigments are soft with milk and earth to soothe the grief into the very structure of the home. The walls aren't just shields. They're participants. You settle beneath a shaded overhang and sip from a water skin. The water is warm, but the wall behind you is still cool. Faintly. And maybe that's enough. Maybe they didn't need their homes to be cold, just less cruel. And blue, in its thousand dusty forms, was the best they could do. By now the sun has begun to rule the sky, again bold, relentless, pressing its weight into every shadow and surface. The heat rises in slow waves from the ground, turning stones into stovetops and the air into a shimmering veil. The village is quieter now, tucked into pockets of shade and silence. Even the goats are missing, as if they've slipped beneath the earth for a nap. You retreat into one of the narrow alleys, where the shadows are deepest. The walls here are tall, the air a little cooler, but something else catches your attention. It's subtle at first, a flash of something too clean, too fresh. A painted symbol, not ancient, not crumbling, new. The wall in front of you is smooth, recently plastered, and glazed in that same sleepy blue. But this one has a marking that breaks. The rhythm, A sigil swirled like a snake curled into itself, dabbed in a shade not quite like the others. There's something a little too shiny about it. You squint. The pigment has a sheen, almost oily, almost forbidden. Then a door creaks. A young man steps out, barely older than a teenager, clutching a small pot in both hands. He freezes when he sees you, then nods slowly and steps aside, gesturing toward the now half-open doorway behind him. You're not sure if you're invited or tolerated. Either way, you step inside. The room is dim, low-roofed, and packed with shelves, jars, bowls, cloth-covered bundles, and in the middle a shallow fire pit, now cold. On the far wall is a shelf filled with tiny stone boxes, each with a different shade of blue. Some are deep and almost purple. Others shimmer with green undertones. One glows faintly in the low light. You've found it, the blue market. This isn't your average painter's stash. This is something more secretive, more curated, more illegal. You spot a box labeled with simple symbols, J21, I only. Another with a snake-shaped scratch across the lid. There's no shouting here, no haggling, just quiet transactions and quick glances. The young man sets his jar down and begins carefully, measuring powder onto a slate tile. Every gesture is precise, ritualistic, reverent. You don't ask what's in it. You don't need to. You can smell the difference. It's lapis, mixed with some sort of resin, possibly pine. Possibly, if your nose is correct, myrrh. Quirky detail of the day. During drought seasons, some Nubian artisans added drops of perfume or sacred oil into their blue paint, believing it would increase the pigment's potency. Some even believed the scent would trick the gods into noticing their home before the neighbors. Here, though it's more than belief, it's business. You realize that some of the pigment mixes here aren't supposed to exist. Trade for certain stones had been banned by temple law generations ago, especially for anyone not blessed by the priesthood. The colors were sacred, not meant for merchants, definitely not for casual homeowners, but rules have a way of bending when there's demand. And clearly there is demand. You glance toward the shelves and notice one labeled simply, Night Dust. The color inside is near black, but under the flicker of a passing torch outside you catch its glint. Not just blue, not just deep, but layered, complex, like someone crushed a star and mixed it with midnight. Historians still argue whether black market pigments like these were punishable by temple law or merely frowned upon. Some accounts suggest that homes discovered with forbidden blues were painted over and a gray-white wash stripped of their color like penance. Others claim the paint wasn't removed. The homeowners were. Still, people painted in this tiny, hidden room. The ritual continues. Another man enters. He places 2 coins flat, thin, bronze on the table and receives a small pouch. No words. Just a nod. You ask quietly, where will that paint go? The young man looks up. His voice is soft. Tomb. You blink. Like a burial tomb? He nods again. For the painter's wife. He wanted star blood blue. Said she loved that color when she was young. You sit down on a stool. Nearby, and your fingers trail across one of the stone boxes. You feel the cold powder inside, almost silky. This isn't about rebellion or vanity. It's about memory. Color here isn't a luxury. It's a language, a way to remember, to resist, to mark the world even in places where no one else is looking. And maybe that's why there's always a black market. Because some shades aren't allowed. Some stories aren't official, but people keep painting them anyway. You stand and thank the young man. He says nothing but gestures toward the wall where the newest blue was painted. You step closer. There, hidden in plain sight, are faint shapes etched beneath the surface eyes, small ones, barely bigger than your thumbnail. Not watching you, but guarding or warning. You exit quietly. Outside, the village is beginning to move again. A few kids are playing with sticks in the dust. A potter opens her shutters. The first breath of breakfast smoke curls into the sky. But behind the stillness, beneath the tradition, you now know there's another layer, a deeper blue, hidden under the safe, sacred surface. A blue that people still fight for. A blue that wasn't made to be silent. The village is fully awake now, stretching into the heat of the day with a kind of stubborn grace. Women sweep the alleys, goats bleat from shaded courtyards, and somewhere a boy plays a reed pipe badly, but with gusto. The morning hum begins, soft and familiar like the grinding of flour or the turning of old gears. And yet, as you pass through it all, you feel different. You've seen the surface, the soothing blue of sun-drenched homes. You've seen the hidden places, pigment markets, forbidden hues, rain-colored dreams. But there's one more corner of the village you haven't explored yet. A part that exists not in trade or taboo, but in something far older and quieter. Shamans, or if not quite shamans, then whatever the local term is for people who can read walls. Not metaphorically, literally. You'd heard whispers about them. Painters who didn't just mix pigment, but listened to it. Who believed every shade had a voice, every hue a mood. They were rare, respected, or feared, depending on the outcome. You find one by accident. She's sitting just outside her home, perched cross-legged under a tattered awning, brushing a wall with her fingers, not painting, not scrubbing, just touching it, listening. She's old. Her hair is gray, her eyes the color of storm clouds. Her walls are different from the others, patched with swirls and lines, almost like fingerprints made by a giant. There are symbols too, none of which you understand. But the paint, it's luminous. Not in brightness, but in depth. You can't stop looking at it. It's like it shifts when you move, as if hiding secrets beneath its surface. You approach slowly. She notices. Of course she does. You're too loud, she says. Without turning, you freeze. In your head, she adds, tapping her own temple. Too many questions. The paint gets confused. You try to apologize, but she waves it off. Then she pats the ground beside her. You sit. For a long moment, you both just stare at the wall. She speaks first. This one is from the year of broken. Floods, she says. The blue came out thin. Wouldn't stick. We added salt. Then it clung like grief. You don't respond. You're not sure what to say. Paint remembers, she continues. Even after the people forget. You see these lines? She points. That's not design, that's echo. And then, slowly, gently, she takes your hand and presses it to the wall. You feel texture. Not just a grain of dried plaster, but something more. The subtle rise and fall of brushstrokes. The places where the pigment pooled or resisted or flaked. Like reading Braille with your palm. Like touching music she lets go. You can't see it yet, she says. But the walls know who's been here, what they carried, what they left. You look closer. The pigment has variations, thicker at the bottom, thinner at the top. There's a soft halo around one corner, like someone leaned there for years. You ask, do you paint them? She shakes her head. I guide them. The walls choose their color. I only help them speak. You think she's joking, but her face doesn't move. And that's when you notice something stranger. The colors on this wall, they aren't just blue. There are greens, purples, grays all, whispering behind the dominant hue like a choir under a soloist. You blink. It's like watching the sky change color at dusk, but it's just one wall. Quirky belief time. Some Nubian villages believed that the souls of a household settled in the pigment of the home. The more harmonious the family, the brighter and more stable the blue. If arguments or grief clouded the air, the color would fade, shift, or peel. A good wall reader could spot a lie just by walking into your courtyard. Historians still debate whether this was symbolic superstition or a clever bit of social psychology. Perhaps the paint did peel more in unhappy homes, maybe neglected repairs reflected deeper turmoil. Or maybe it really was the pigment. Picking up on something human, you ask the woman if she teaches others. No, she replies. The walls teach if they like you. You wonder if they like you? Then she smiles only a little and says yours would be teal, soft, a little unsure, but steady. You grin. You'll take that. Before you leave, she presses a small stone into your hand. It's smooth, faintly blue, with one spiral etched into its surface. Don't use it, she says, just carry it. Let it listen. You walk away feeling oddly lighter, as if something had been lifted, not explained, but released, back in. The village, people are stirring rice, braiding hair, gathering clay pots. No one else seems to notice the woman behind the awning, or the stories her walls are trying to tell, but you do. And now everything looks different. You look at a blue wall and wonder, what shade is that family's grief? What story does that patch of fading paint try to remember? You glance down at the stone in your hand. It's warm now. You don't know why. Maybe the walls do. The afternoon stretches across the village like a sleeping cat languid, warm and just heavy enough to make you slow your pace. The sun is still high, but less aggressive now. Its light slants across the blue-painted homes, turning some to silver, others to sapphire, and casting long shadows that seem to reach for your ankles. You find yourself drawn toward a quieter part of the village. The walls here are older, their colors muted not from neglect, but from the soft erosion of time. This is not the place of pigment masters or hidden markets. This is the home of memory, of families who've stayed and painted and repainted not for beauty or blessing, but because that's simply what they do. And sitting just beyond the last painted house, in a low chair carved from an old tree stump, is an elder, wrapped in layers of linen the color of smoke and bone. He watches you approach with the calm of someone who's seen it all and decided none of it is worth rushing for. You greet him. He nods, then gestures toward the blue wall behind him. You want to know why it's still blue, he says before you can even ask. You sit down beside him. He doesn't look at you, just stares at the house, the wall, the peeling curve of painted edge around a windowsill. My father painted that, he says, with his brothers. First time it was blue, I mean. Before that it was red, ochre from the hills, but they changed it. He pauses, said the blue kept the heat out, but mostly it kept the bad things out. The spirits, the neighbors, the government. He chuckles. Just once, you glance at the wall. The pigment is soft here, dusty, pale, the kind of blue that seems to exhale rather than speak. We kept painting it, he continues, every few years, even when money was tight, even when the roof leaked, the walls came first. Why? You ask Dot. He finally turns to you. Because blue is ours. You blink. He sees your confusion. Not just mine. Not just my family's, ours. This village, this place. Everyone else has something else. Clay, stone, brick. We have this. The color that remembers. You're quiet for a while. He doesn't seem to need a reply. Then he leans forward and picks up a small bowl sitting beside him. Inside is a brush short-handled. Its bristles stiff from dried pigment. Do you want to try? He asks. Dot, you hesitate. Then nod. Dot, he hands you the brush and points toward a bare patch near the doorway. The plaster is uneven, the last layer of pigment long faded. You dip the brush into the bowl. The paint is thick, a rich ultramarine with tiny flecks of white stone. You press it to the wall and drag it slowly downward. It leaves a stripe like twilight, uneven, imperfect, but alive. He watches you. Not bad, he says. You're still thinking too hard, but not bad. You both laugh. He tells you stories as you paint. How his mother used to mix the wash with tamarind water, claiming it helped the pigment grip the soul of the wall. How his grandfather once painted his entire home dark blue after a dream told him the color would bring back the rain. How the neighbors thought he'd gone mad until the river flooded. 2 weeks later, he points to a corner of the wall where a spiral is faintly visible beneath layers of newer paint. That's my sister's mark, he says. She thought the color blue was a doorway. Historians still argue whether these personal markings were symbolic or simply decorative. Some believe they were part of informal storytelling, each house a living journal, each wall a canvas for quiet declarations, love, grief, pride, resistance, quirky detail. In some regions it was believed that when a person died, their final breath could cling to the wall, especially if it was blue. That's why some families repainted the house immediately after a death to give the soul somewhere soft to land. You step back and look at the patch you painted. It doesn't match exactly. Your stroke is a little crooked. The color hasn't quite dried, but it belongs now. A tiny piece of you, absorbed into centuries of silent artistry. The elder nods. It'll fade, he says. But that's the point. Everything does. The trick is putting it there anyway. You sit beside him again as the sun begins its slow slide toward the horizon. The wall glows golden now, the blue beneath it softening into something almost alive. You ask him if he's ever thought of changing the color. He shakes his head. Why change what holds you up? You think about that for a long while. Then you ask, what if someone painted it green? He laughs, a real laugh this time. Then I'd repaint it blue, he says, before it dried. A breeze stirs the air, fluttering the edges of his robe. A goat walks past and gives you a look like it heard the joke and disapproves. You stay until the shadow of the house stretches long enough to touch your toes. Then you stand. The elder nods again, but says nothing. You turn to go, but before you leave, you look back at the wall. Your brushstroke still shines. For now, the sun has begun its descent, casting the village in a warm amber wash. Shadows stretch long and lean across the alleyways. The blue walls, once radiant under morning light, now wear their color more gently, less statement, more memory. You wander back toward the center of the village, letting your steps slow. Everyone moves a little differently now. There's no rush. The hottest hours are behind you. The work is done. It's the time for tea, for conversation in half whispers, for leaning against cool walls and watching the sky change. You find a place to sit. You're back against a small house, painted in a familiar mid-tone blue, something between sky and slate. You recognize the swirls from earlier. You've walked this alley before, but it feels different now, because now the color isn't just beautiful dot, it's alive with meaning. You start to notice things you hadn't before, small indentations in the plaster, each one likely a fingerprint from some long-forgotten artisan. A line of tiny shells pressed into the topmost edge of the wall, forming a decorative border that had gone unnoticed under harsh daylight. Someone cared. Someone took time. The wall doesn't just exist, Dot. It wants to be seen, Dot. And in that quiet moment, you let your hand rest gently against it. The texture is still rough, still dry, but the heat has faded. It holds just the faintest hint of warmth from the afternoon, like an exhale after a long sigh. You close your eyes, and something shifts. It's subtle. Not a voice. Not a vision, but a feeling. A presence, like the wall is remembering for you. Painted surface seems to hum with every hand that's touched it. Every coat layered over the last. Every birth, loss, storm, and celebration it has stood through. You don't need a history book. You have this line of pigment, this patch of color, this moment, Dot, and somewhere, deeper within the stillness, you remember that story the pigment master told, the one about his daughter and the goat with the rain-shaped birthmark. You still don't know if he made it up. It doesn't matter anymore. It's stuck. That's what stories do. That's what color does. You watch as a young girl runs past, her fingers trailing along the walls like she's playing a scale on a silent instrument. She hums as she goes off key and perfect. She stops at a doorway and dips her hand into a bowl of chalky paste. then pats it gently against the frame. A fresh handprint joins. The generation's already there. The woman inside the house doesn't. Scold her. She nods. She's seen it 1,000 times. Maybe she did the same thing when she was little. You smile, and here's your final quirky tidbit. Some Nubian families used to bring newborn babies outside at sunset, just once, and press their tiny feet against the blue wall. A first blessing. Paint and dust clinging to tiny toes, linking them to the house, the land, the lineage. A soft footprint. A claim. You imagine that now, one more mark among many. You rest your head against the wall. You're not in a museum, not on a tour. There are no plaques, no tour guides, no velvet ropes, just walls that breathe, paint that remembers, shade that holds you like a lullaby. Historians still argue whether this whole blue tradition was mostly aesthetic, spiritual, or environmental. Some dig through ruins to measure brush stroke angles. Others write papers about pigment psychodynamics. But here in the fading warmth, you realize something simpler. The walls are still blue. That's the answer. The people here still mix their paint. They still tell their stories. They still press their palms to the surface and add another layer. Because tradition isn't something you remember. It's something you do over and over until it becomes part of the wall, until it becomes part of you. And as the sky darkens to indigo, you finally close your eyes. You feel the air shift. The last heat leaves the bricks. And slowly, gently, the blue deepens. You don't need to understand everything. You just need to let it hold you. Now the sun is gone, and the last light melts away behind the distant hills. The sky above the village turns velvet black, scattered with stars as soft and slow as breath. The walls around you, once brilliant, then quiet now, barely glow. Their blue faded into shadows, but they are still there, still sheltering, still telling stories, even if only in dreams. You're lying down now, your head resting on folded arms, your body warm and heavy in the night air. A breeze slips through the alley, carrying the faintest scent of paint dust, dried herbs, and fire smoke. The sounds of the village are hushed. A soft footstep here, a distant murmur there. Mostly there is stillness, your breathing slows. Stories you've heard tonight settle in your chest like powder in a pigment jar. You don't need to make sense of it all. You don't need to paint anything. You only need to rest. And maybe, when morning comes, you'll carry a little piece of this blue with you, a quiet calm, a grounded weight, a cooler kind of memory. The kind that lingers long after the walls themselves have faded. So let your thoughts drift now like dust in a sunbeam. Let your mind ease into sleep, slow and unhurried. The walls are still blue, the paint still holds, and you are safe within it. Good night.